A few years ago, I had one of the most frightening mornings of my life. It was early, maybe a little after 5, still completely dark outside. The air was heavy with mist that blurred the streetlights and made the neighborhood look unfamiliar. I was half awake, carrying my bag and eating a banana while I headed to the bus stop. My thoughts were on something small and unimportant, deciding whether I wanted to stop for coffee before or after my commute. I was almost at the corner where I usually waited for the bus. The street was quiet, and I could hear only my own steps. As I passed the mouth of an alley, someone stepped out of the darkness. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, and wore a black mask. At first, my brain tried to dismiss it. I was tired, and in that half second, I thought maybe he was just another person heading to work. But then he raised an arm, and in his hand was a gun, aimed directly at me. His voice cut through the silence, and he told me to put down my purse. That was the moment I understood exactly what was happening. I froze, then tried to stay calm. He told me again to put down my bags, and I nodded quickly. I said I was going to put them down, and I moved slowly, placing them off to the side. My heart was racing, but my body was stiff, like I was moving through water. He ordered me to come closer to him toward the alley and to get down on the ground. I kept agreeing. Inside, I felt like my chest might burst from how fast my heart was beating. My hands were sticky from the banana peel I was still holding, and that strange detail stuck in my mind, like part of me was clinging to anything normal. The more afraid I became, the more I found myself talking. I told him I was on the ground. I told him my things were right over there and that he could just take them. He did not like me speaking. He shouted at me to stop. He pressed the gun harder against my head, and then he leaned down on top of me. It was then that something shifted. I was dressed in oversized clothes, baggy pants, a large jacket, and a cap pulled low. I was on my way to coach a practice, and my outfit made me look more like a teenage boy than a woman. But as he pressed down on me and listened to me speak, I could see him realize the truth. My voice gave me away. In that moment, his focus seemed to change. He stepped back, stood up, and pointed toward the alley. He told me to come with him. That was the worst moment of all. The alley was narrow, dark, and led away from the street. I knew that several women in the neighborhood had been attacked recently, even in broad daylight, and the memory of those reports hit me hard. My stomach sank. I knew what could be waiting if I obeyed. In my head, 2 voices argued. One said there was no way I should ever go down there. The other said he had a gun and that I had no choice. His real voice kept cutting through my thoughts loud and sharp, demanding that I follow. I kept my own voice steady. I told him I was following. I told him I was coming. For whatever reason, he believed me. He turned his body toward the alley as if he was leading me there, shifting his attention for only a second. That second was enough. I took 2 small steps backward. Then I lowered my head, braced myself, and ran. I sprinted as fast as I have ever moved in my life. My throat released a sound I did not recognize at first, a high scream that followed me down the street. I ran block after block, 6 or 7 at least, before I slowed down enough to breathe. My entire body was shaking, and my chest hurt from the rush of air. I did not dare wait at the bus stop. I turned back and made my way to my apartment, hoping with everything in me that he had not followed and that he would not see where I lived. When I finally reached the door, I locked it behind me and collapsed. My heart would not slow down. Later, I called the police. They searched the alley, but of course the man was gone by then. The only thing they found was my banana peel lying on the ground, already turning brown. It was such a small detail, but it stayed in my mind as proof that it all really happened. For days afterward, my body would not calm down. I would replay it over and over, imagining what could have happened if I had obeyed and walked into that alley. Even now, years later, I still think about that morning. I was lucky that he believed me, lucky that he turned his head, lucky that I ran when I did. I survived, but I am haunted more by what could have happened than by what actually did. And every time I walk past a dark corner, or an empty street at night, the memory comes back, reminding me how close I came to disappearing into that alley and never walking out again. A while back, I had one of those nights that never leaves you. My house sits farther back in the lot than most of the others. The sidewalk runs the length of the living room and stops at the front porch, which opens right into the living room. There are large windows that do not open, so the room gets great light during the day, but no privacy at night. The rest of my family was away on vacation, and I decided to have a few drinks alone and enjoy the quiet. I fell asleep on the couch around 9. When I woke up, I realized I was too nervous to walk back to my bedroom, which is toward the back of the house. The couch sits directly under those big windows, so getting up would mean crossing into full view. I dozed off and woke again with a sudden chill that I could not explain. It felt like someone had blown cold air in the room. I lay still and tried to shake it off. Then the banging started. It came from directly above me at the window. I did not move. I opened my eyes and stared up. A figure was standing outside at the window and was pounding on the glass with both hands. I remember looking at the cable box clock. It said 3 in the morning. For a long beat, I thought I might be dreaming, because this felt impossible. The bang came again and my body locked. The first time it stopped, I still did not move. I kept expecting it to return. A moment later, the banging recommenced, and this time it was coming from 2 places at once. Someone was hitting the glass over my head, and someone else was pounding on the front door. They were relentless. I did not make a sound. The front door has a peephole, but it faces the porch, and the porch light was off. I could not see the faces outside, but I could see movement through the frosted glass. I kept thinking they would break something and run. I kept picturing silhouettes stepping back and disappearing down the sidewalk. 40 minutes felt like an hour. The banging came and went in waves. Sometimes it would stop for what felt like a lifetime, and then return louder as if more people had gathered. Once I heard something scrape against the frame, like someone trying to force the lock. I pressed my back into the couch and held my breath until my chest hurt. My phone was on the coffee table across the room. Every instinct screamed at me to grab it and call someone, but stepping away from the windows felt like walking into the danger itself. Finally, the noise stopped. One instant the porch was pounding, and the next it was silent. I sat there in the dark under the big windows and felt like I might collapse. I did not go to the door. I did not look outside. I waited until first light, as if the day would make it less real. When I finally got the courage to glance out the window, there were no footprints on the porch and no cars on the street. The yard looked untouched, like nothing had happened. The next day I called a friend and asked if he could come stay for the rest of the week. I told him what had happened and that I could not be alone. He laughed and said there was no point and that coming over would not make things safer. His response made me feel foolish for asking, but I was still scared. I called the police. They came out and checked the porch and the windows. They said there were no signs of forced entry and no fingerprints that stood out. They suggested it might have been a prank or a drunk neighbor. That explanation did nothing to settle me. If it had been a prank, who would know my house is more set back and has those big non-opening windows and still decide to make a point of hitting both the glass and the door in the middle of the night? After that night, I found myself avoiding the living room after dark. I installed motion lights on the porch and a small camera that looks back down the sidewalk. Every creak in the house made my heart jump. I kept replaying the noise in my head and trying to map it to something ordinary. Could a branch have hit the glass? Could a raccoon have somehow climbed the porch and banged at the window? Weeks later, I would wake at 3 in the morning and check the clock just to prove to myself that time was still moving. I would catch myself checking the windows and feeling small for being afraid in a house that had never felt unsafe before. I would stand at the back of the house and watch the side of my yard where the sidewalk runs and imagine a shadow stepping into the light to pound at my window. I never found out who was there that night. No one called to apologize. No neighbor reported anything. There were no CCTV recordings from the street that showed anyone on my porch. I kept half expecting someone to come back and tell me they had been messing with me, but it never happened. The memory remains a wedge in the middle of ordinary days. I can have a calm evening with friends and then get home and feel that same cold crawl under my skin when I cross my living room. My uncle used to work a lot when I was younger. He's done a lot of different things to make money, but one consistent thing is that in the summer months and into late fall, he paints houses. It's a legitimate business. He's got a truck with a number and a name and supplies in the back. Every now and then he would call my dad when he needed a little extra help, and I'd work for him. No big deal, it's just painting houses. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it takes a while to paint a whole house. If the weather conditions aren't right, then you can't paint. One particular fall was extremely wet. It rained what felt like every single day. My uncle would paint multiple houses at a time, so sometimes he would get caught up due to situations like these, and I'd work a little more than usual. That was fine by me though. The job wasn't hard and it paid well. It was a warm day for late fall, but there was still a distinct chill in the air. My uncle had this job he had to finish. It was an old Victorian house in a quiet part of town. A lady and her husband, who was an author, lived there. Due to the weather, it had taken longer than expected to paint the house, and there were family issues going on at the time, which further complicated things. My uncle gets a call one day from the lady who lives at the house. She says that her husband is trying to write his next book, but he keeps getting distracted by the scaffolding outside the house, so she wanted to know if we could come over and finish the job as soon as possible. My uncle was always an honest businessman. They had contracted him to do the job in midsummer, but he had lots of jobs that summer, and the wet conditions I mentioned above made it difficult to finish anything. However, these people were insistent but really polite, and not wanting to lose customers or get a bad recommendation, my uncle decided to put the house as a high priority. After all, it would only take a day or two to finish. We show up to this house mid-afternoon. Like I said, it was a weird kind of chilly that day, and I also remember a really eerie calm. The day was slightly overcast, so everything was shrouded in gray. It was like the perfect setting for a mystery crime novel. So we arrive at this house, and my uncle and I move to the back. The front of the house was already done, so there was nothing left there. My uncle, being the more experienced painter, would always do the touch-ups, and I would simply apply the first coats, since they took little skill. We get to the back of the house, and he asks me if I'm scared of heights. I was 17 at the time, and although they do creep me out a little, I didn't want to seem like a child in front of my uncle, so I told him I wasn't. He was happy to hear that. He has me climb up the scaffold to the 3rd floor to finish an upper section of the house. There was a window up there, a small little oval one that looked into the attic. The attic also happened to be the husband's study. He would do most of his writing in there. So I'm climbing up this scaffolding, cans of paint dangling behind me, and various paintbrushes and other tools in the utility belt my uncle let me borrow. I get to the top of the scaffolding and set all my supplies down. I crack open a can of paint and start painting like I had a few hundred times before. I'm working my way across the top part of the house when I get to the window that looks into the study. I bend down, dip my paintbrush, and stand back up to paint above the window. The window was in my direct line of sight, and I couldn't help gazing in. I see a man, the husband, staring back at me with a face completely barren of any emotion. I had never seen a face so devoid of feeling before. I still haven't. Of course, I get startled and take a step back. I chuckle and smile at the guy, but he doesn't smile back. Instead, while remaining completely emotionless, he draws a pistol up to his head that he was holding in his hand the whole time and proceeds to blow his brains out. In utter shock, I gasp and let out the smallest scream as I step back in fear. I stepped back a step too much and fell off the scaffolding. Alerted by the gunshot, my uncle looked up in just enough time to see me fall off the scaffolding from the 3rd story. I was lucky enough to land in a bush and only suffer a broken ankle and a few scratches. The biggest wounds happened in my head. I had to go to counseling for a while. It's been years since then, and I still remember that man's face. I've never forgotten it. It will always be burned in the back of my head. I know why, looking back, his face was so devoid of emotion, because he never felt any emotion at all. He literally didn't care about what he was doing. As it turns out, the man was seriously depressed and facing marital issues with his wife. Combined with a few too many nights drunk on whiskey and facing writer's block, I guess he decided he couldn't take it anymore. His wife moved out of the house shortly after, and we never finished the job. To this day, that house remains abandoned. And to this day, I'm scared to drive down the street that it's on. I'm scared that if I do and happen to pass the backyard, I'll see that man staring back at me from that window, cold and emotionless. When I was about 13, our dog ran away from home more than once. The back gate did not always latch properly, and someone in the family would forget to close it all the way, so she would slip out. Most of the time it was nothing. She was curious and wandered to the alleys behind houses where people left trash and old boxes. I knew how she behaved. The minute she saw me, she would drop whatever she was sniffing and come straight over. We would head home, and that was that. This time felt different from the start. I went out looking for her the way I normally did, but after an hour, I still could not find her. I walked further than she ever had before and started to get really worried. I was nearly 6 blocks away in a part of town with townhouses and rental properties where she had never wandered. I was almost ready to give up and go home to wait when I saw something move behind a wooden fence. I thought I heard a tiny yip. I walked up to the fence, and there she was, muddy and wet, and chained to a post in the middle of someone's backyard. She was barking and pulling at the chain, trying to get to me. She had her collar on, so I assumed whoever lived there had found her roaming and brought her in. I could see her tag, and I knew it was her. She looked exhausted and scared, but she saw me and flipped out with relief. I rang the doorbell. It took a second before anyone came. An older man opened the door and looked at me through a crack. He peered out like someone who had been woken up. He said yes. I told him my name and that I was there about my dog. I said thank you and that I was glad he had her. He looked at me like he did not understand. He asked what dog. He really asked that. I pointed to the yard, and the dog began barking louder. He looked toward the back and then back at me and made a face like he was annoyed. He said, "Oh, that dog." Like the words were something he had to say to be polite. Then he closed the door and I heard him move away. I stuck my foot in the door and stopped it from shutting. I told him the dog was in his yard and I was taking her back. I pointed hard enough that the dog barked like she was trying to tell him. He opened the door again and walked out into the yard. The dog cowered as he approached. She did not go near him at first, and when he unhooked the chain, she stayed as far away as she could. He stepped past her to open the gate, and she bolted to me. She leapt into my arms. He went back inside without saying anything. No apology, no explanation, no offering to call the number on her tag. I do not know what I expected. I just remember how wrong it felt. He had not looked like someone who had rescued her. He looked like someone who had been keeping her. I do not know what would have happened if I had not kept walking that far. I do not know if they would have called someone or taken her to a shelter or kept her. I do not know why they had chained her at all instead of letting her go or calling the number. The whole situation sat with me like a cold stone. After that, she never left the yard the way she used to. If the gate was open, she was within a few feet of it. Once we even found her waiting outside the back gate, like she was guarding the boundary between the house and the street. I stopped letting her roam even a little. I started checking the gate every time I went outside myself. I kept her on a leash for longer walks, and I learned to find her right away instead of assuming she would be nearby. It was not a dramatic show of malice. There was no shouting, no hitting, no police call. That made it worse. It was the casual way the man tried to pretend nothing was happening, the way he seemed ready to keep her without a second thought that left me unsettled. I kept thinking about the chain and the way she had looked at him when he walked up. The way she had cowered made me feel like there was a story I would never hear. I do not know what he planned to do with her. Maybe he would have kept her tied up for a few days before letting her go. Maybe he wanted to sell her or give her away. Maybe he would have hurt her if I had not shown up. The way she shrank from him makes me think she already knew more than I did. I will never know for sure, and that is what unsettles me the most. How close I might have been to never seeing her again, and how easily it could have turned into a story with a much darker ending.